Hey folks, my name's Kevin and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery, and today we're unboxing a knife I wanted to check out for a really long time. This is the FIF20 from Philippe Jourget and produced by Custom Knife Factory. It took me a while to get my hands on one of these because there's not that many of them. They're kind of expensive. So we'll talk about all of that more once we actually get it open. To open this up, since this is a hand rubbed satin sleek all-tie front flipper, figured I'd use a different hand rub satin sleek all-tie front flipper. This is the Trevor Burger Urban, one of the custom versions of the production Urban EDC LC, I think it's called. And if those are still available at pre-order when this knife drops, go over to Urban EDC, pick one of these up. This custom version, at least, is one of my absolute favorite knives, period, at this point. I adore it. So feel free to go grab that. If you want to use my referral link, that'd be great, but you don't have to do that. Anyway, let's get into here. And I drop it on the floor. Okay, so Custom Knife Factory knives come in these cool little pouches. So let's open this up. And here we have all of the classic goodies. One of the things that's really cool about CKF knives is that they ship a full set of extra hardware. I don't know why they chose to start doing that. I don't know if it's because these knives are shipping from overseas, typically from Russia. So maybe they just want to save on shipping or something. But I love when companies do this. MBK tends to do this too. So anyway, other companies, please start doing this. So there we go. FIF20, Philippe Jourget, M390, and this one, oh wait, so this card is used for any of them, but this one is in M390 and the full titanium. It's not those other versions. We'll talk about that maybe probably later. They're suggesting a hashtag to use to share it. And then the actual knife, they always wrap it in one of these CKF things there, but oh, that is pretty. Yeah, let's just ogle this for a little moment. Okay, how's the detent on this? Yeah, we'll talk about that more in a little sec. Yeah, okay. Let me use a hank to wipe this blade down. I always keep one of these hanks around. This one's from my friend Chris, Renegade Provisions Co., and they're just perfect for this kind of rubbing it down. Oh my gosh, look at that. Can I get that to focus? That hand satin is so pretty. There, we're starting to kind of get focus on it. Oof, that is gorgeous. And so this is the overall profile of this knife. And this is just so freaking pretty to me. I've always wanted to check one of these out because I think the general silhouette and lines of this knife are just stunning. It's so clean and just, yeah, I don't know, man. This is really up my alley. It's on the bigger side for what I like. This is 3.375 inches, 3 3/8 inches, and that's just over what I tend to go for. But it's still in a range that I think will work really well for me. I tend to go for 3 to 3 1/4 inch, and so we'll talk a little bit more about what those the alternative that I wish existed, and we'll see in a moment. But right now, I think this is going to be a good size for me. How does this feel in hand? Ooh, I actually really quite like this in hand so far. Okay, and then how does the action work? Yeah, that's one of the things that people always talk about. Ooh, that works really nice. Yeah, and now here's a big one. This is one of the reasons why it took me so long to get this, is that I'm not super duper into front flipper only knives because it's a good deployment method, but it's never been my favorite deployment method. I prefer to Spidey Flick stuff. And then someone reminded me that you can access the blade grind here. And you might have noticed in the opening that I opened this knife not by front flicking it like that, but instead by doing this. And what I'm doing there is I'm placing my finger along this exposed bevel, or the primary bevel on the primary grind on the knife, and I'm pressing against it and using that to fling the knife out. And it usually gives a pretty good effect. Let's see if it works over here. It normally works on any knife that you can get at that primary grind. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this makes the knife instantly ooh, not super easy, so much more compelling to me because I just love, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out how to practice that. I love being able to reverse flick a knife, and that just makes, yeah, that makes me want to play with it so much more. And then it turns into a knife that has multiple deployment methods. Okay, let's back up just a bit. Who is Philippe Jourget? He is a French knife maker. He is a custom knife maker, and he doesn't have a ton of knives I'm super familiar with. He has one that's called like the Hi-Fi that looks kind of cool, and he has one that I don't know how to pronounce the name of, but I've always liked the look of. It's like P''T''I, Petit, P, like petite. I have no idea. I'm not French. I don't know if that's like a way of, I don't know. I have no idea. But those, his other knives do appeal to me. But the FIF line is the one that I think is probably by far his most famous and the one that appeals to me the most. I also am not 100% confident that it's supposed to be pronounced FIF. Maybe it is FIF. Maybe it is FIF. I don't know. But I normally hear it described as FIF, so I'm going to keep calling it that. And that's a line of custom knives that he makes, and there's the FIF18, the FIF20, and the FIF23. And again, I don't really know where those numbers come from either, because that corresponds to a roughly 3-inch blade, a 3.1 inch, I think, a 3.5 inch, and a 4-inch blade in his custom knife line. And none of those numbers there really correspond to something that lines up to 18, 20, and 23, as far as I understand. Like if I just do conversion, that's not like metric or something. Now, at some point, he started working with Custom Knife Factory to create a production version of his knife. And they started with the FIF23, and those, I think, translated as is from a 4-inch knife to like a 3.98 inch knife. And they were pretty darn expensive, and they were pretty darn big, and everything about them was just kind of not what I was going to go for. It's too big of a knife for me. But then they made, the following year, they made the production versions of the FIF20. And the FIF20 in his custom, like I said, is a 3.5 inch knife. It's been scaled down here to 3 3/8, 3.375. And I'm so glad they did that, because at this tall of a blade and everything like that, a 3.5 inch knife is probably more than I would have wanted. And so this is, I think, going to be pretty darn good size for me. What I would love, I referenced this earlier a little bit, what I would love is for them to make a production version of the FIF18. But the reality is that Philippe himself has not made very many of the FIF18s. But if they translated it to a 3-inch production version, man, I would adore that. One of the other things that made these knives not... the bigger versions of these were so big, but they're also really thick and heavy. And so there's a like a bolster appearance liner lock version of this that is also pretty darn thick. And so I'm really pleased to see that this full tie version is reasonably slim. I don't know what this thickness is, but I was worried because I think the liner lock versions are thick enough that they're like 0.56 inches or thick or something like that. And this one definitely isn't. And so this feels nice and slim in my hand. The other thing is that the weight, so these are heavily skeletonized. Let's look at that right there, get the light to reflect up in. Now you can't see because the backspacer, the light doesn't shine up, but this kind of pattern here continues the entire rest of the way over here. Now, interestingly, they don't do any kind of skeletonization past here. The backspacer kicks in on the other side, and then of course the lock bar itself is not skeletonized, but you do have that same kind of skeletonization at the top right there. And so this version here with the full tie has less weight to it. I don't really know what the weight is. I haven't measured it, and it's not listed on the sites that I've looked at, but that's one of the other things is that if you get the versions that has like full zirconium bolsters, zirconium is a pretty heavy metal, and it has they'll have like the full liners on that. The other versions just kind of are a little bit heavy. They're listed to something like 4.5 ounces or something, a little bit even more. And for this size, that's just like on the higher end of what I want. So this one feels pretty good. I would say this probably feels like probably closer to 4 ounces. And for this, I don't know, maybe, screw it. I'll just measure it. What is this actually? Yeah, 4.3. Okay, so this is on the higher end of what I would want the weight to be for a a 3.3 inch knife, but it's not done in a way that makes it feel like too heavy. I find that if the knife is going to be heavier like this, that when they're taller like that, it spreads it out in my hand in a way that just feels better. I don't like when they tend to be really slim but heavy, because then it feels like a weird stick in your hand, but this feels pretty nice. Where's the balance point on that though? I'm gonna guess it's right about there. Yeah. So that is the one consequence. If they were able to skeletonize this even more, we would have the balance point in a little bit nicer spot closer up to where your pointer finger is, like where you want it. And right now this is sitting at about the second finger. But yeah, I don't know. I'd say that this is one of those knives that kind of surprises me. It feels a little bit more balanced than I would anticipate given all of that. I do feel, especially with this full back spacer, that you can tell that the weight is at the back of your hand more. But it doesn't, I don't really get that same sense of total loss of where the tip is as much as looking at that back spacer. That's really pretty. Get that to focus. Yeah, it's got this chamfer that goes in here and separates these like that. And I think one of the things that I really like about that is that visually, there's 3 stripes, and then the backspacer itself has these 3 kind of sides to it. And all of those just kind of mirror the 3 panels you see here. This itself is one of the things that makes people a lot of people compare this to Vero Engineering's knives. These came first, but it's not like a matter of copying the idea of having 3 panels. It's just geometric design, spontaneous co-invention, but it's similar enough that I think it's kind of an undeniable comparison. But I really like it. Like, I like geometric things, especially when they're clean and minimal. And so it's my love of the design of this knife that made me always really want to check out one of the Veros and that kind of stuff, because they just look similar in a way that they're both things that I like. One of the complaints that I've heard about this knife from people, and I actually have a bunch of friends that just talk crap about this knife all the time. They don't like it. And the reason is because they say it's jabby. And I can totally understand that, because like this corner, yeah, that's jabby. It doesn't need to be, and it is jabby. These corners really are jabby. That's true. And I've also been told that these corners are pretty jabby. Yep, and that's true. And then the other thing that I've been told is that this back corner right here on the clip catches on your pants and is kind of jabby. And that probably is true. So those really are pointy. And so the thing is I now have a friend who owns one of the rare OG customs of these, and he told me and showed me pictures that this is part of the lost in translation thing when going to a production model, that the versions on the corners on all of these, and you can see in the pictures if you look at one of them, they're just better rounded off. They're just smooth. They're just slightly melted in a way that makes them not quite so pointy. But one thing I will say is that like this one just doesn't need to exist. This kind of cutout here you'll often see on knives that have like a thumb stud as a stop pin, because they're trying to get that thumb stud out of the way of the blade. But for this, that top point right there is just where they're putting the logos. That's the Custom Knife Factory logo, and that is the Philippe Jourget logo. And so I think stylistically, it's a really kind of nice way of framing that. I think it sits there in a nice way, but I don't know that I would prefer this kind of cool aesthetic of the framing over them just having this be a normal corner and not put these corners on. Now, you're not normally holding the knife ever like this. I don't know why you would ever be pressing your fingers here, but it does suck to do that. That feels bad. What else would I say? I can immediately tell I want them to extend this jimping up further. So they've stopped. This is very good jimping, by the way. This is crisp, sharp, but shallow jimping. And so this is the kind of jimping that immediately grabs your finger, but doesn't hurt to press against. But you can see that they've stopped it right here. And this is the kind of thing where the flipper tab itself is below the surface. Well, I mean, barely extends above, but the part that's extending above doesn't have any jimping on it. And so you can't really just press up on this kind of knife. You have to use that jimping to pull up and out. And so while the flipper on this works great, it doesn't work quite as well as something like this. because this, by extending just slightly above the top of the knife and having the jimping wrap up around, means that you can place your finger further up here like this, and having your thumb above the front of the handle allows you to just push or pull straight up, which gives you a better flick because your follow through is pushing in the direction of the blade that nub is trying to go. If you have to rely on traction to pull out, then you are pushing your thumb outward, and while the flipper tab itself is still just traveling up, and so you lose contact quicker. And so this is the kind of thing where it works perfectly fine, but not spectacular. You know, it could be better by them just extending these jimping marks just slightly up and allowing you to put your finger more up here and get traction and push up that way. I also wouldn't mind if this flipper tab extended up a little bit further, but I think as is, it looks quite nice. What else can I say about this? Oh, yeah, one of the reasons why my friends that don't love this knife don't love it is because the versions they have a pretty weak detent. It's not uncommon for a liner lock version of a knife to have a weaker detent than a frame lock version of the knife. And it just comes down to how lock bars flex and bend. Even when you have a cutout like this with relief there to make it so that the lock bar is thinner, the rest of the lock bar is still a thick piece of metal. And so they tend to be just less flexible. So they tend to apply more pressure and tend to have a firmer detent as a result. And so on a front flipper knife, it's not uncommon to want a light detent. I actually lightened the detent on this one to the point where now it's pretty light, but it's a perfect balance for me to be able to use this any of the normal ways I want. And the thing about that is it works really great on smaller, thinner, lighter knives, but when you scale things up to bigger, having a really light detent can kind of mean that you can shake the blade out. So most of my friends had the liner lock versions and said that the detent was pretty weak. And so it didn't feel nice and snappy like that. You didn't get a good action. It could shake out. This version, I am pleased to say, one of the reasons why I went for the full type frame lock version is it does indeed have a stronger detent. I wouldn't say this is outright strong, but if I pull from the same spot with the same lever arm distance as where you would find a thumb stud on a normal knife, this is, I'd say on the low end of medium, but like solidly medium still. And so as a result, you get a pretty strong deployment that way and a good thwack that way. And you definitely don't, I cannot shake that out. I wonder if no, it's not coming out. And so this is exactly what I was hoping for, that a version of the knife that has a firmer enough detent to be actually quite pleasant. Now, let me think. What else? Okay, so one of the things that I've always been curious about is how this feels. So it has this interesting chamfer here that I don't 100% know why it's this. I think it's just aesthetic. If you look at it from this angle, this kind of comes in down like that, and those lines follow onto the lock bar. It's definitely unique. Most knives would have just left this filled in, but it's a cool look. One of the things that it does, though, is it gives you this kind of ramp quality as you go on, and that makes it pretty darn easy to open up this lock bar. You have both recession here and scalloping here and this kind of ramp quality. I do notice that this corner here is pretty abrupt. Like this is kind of a hard line. And so it's not the absolute most comfortable thing to press on, but it's not bad actually. And I do think that access to it is easy. And even though this is firmer, like you would expect on a frame lock, it's not so firm that it's hard to push over. And it's actually, I guess I'd say it's light enough. And if you look at where their detent ball is being placed, they're doing the thing where the detent ball is placed as far in as they can to get it up close here. And what that means is they have a very short lever arm distance. And that's partly how they're doing that. The other part of that is that this is just a long enough, thick enough, heavy enough blade that those two things balance each other. I suspect, I haven't checked yet, but I suspect that this is going to have a late detent engagement as a result, because one of the consequences of pulling the detent ball in really far is that the blade has to travel further to make contact with it. Like if it was out here at the edge, then I would have hit it right there. I'd be like, whoomp, I'd hit it. But I have to keep going in order to hit that one. So I suspect, yeah. So that's fully open, and that's there. And that, I suspect that that's going to be that looks to me like it's going to be about 20 to 24 degrees. I don't love it, but I think it's going to, exactly, I think it's not going to not matter for that reason. So I care about whether or not there is a late detent if the way that I want to close the knife is going to mean getting up on that detent ball matters. And I tend to let knives drop to my nail if they'll drop to my nail in a way that's safe. And this knife, you can see based on the way that this is cut out right here, there's this whole spot here, and then this, there's like this much distance here, that this knife is falling to my nail right before the edge here. So I'm able to have this drop to my thumb in a way that has this edge not contact me at all. So it's not going to split my thumb over open like left EDC's monster nightmare thumbnails, and it's not going to like hit me out here. I think if you were closing this knife when the kind of like this, where you have this at an angle, it could definitely fall and hit you. And I think the way lefty tends to do it, that makes it fall and hit his nails, he tends to hold it like this at a side and have it fall down, and then that corner might puncture you. But I tend to hold these with my finger vertically upward, and then it just falls like that. And so I do personally, yeah, those front flipper, when it's a little bit harder, when it's a little bit firmer, you got to make sure that you're holding it right. Anyway, I personally do not care that this one has a late detent because it's not going to impact me. But you might close your knives differently, and you might thus care. So if you tend to be someone that closes your knives like this and then hopes to shake it, yeah, you're going to, honestly, it shook past that pretty easily. Let me try that again. I'm up on it. No, I bounced back. I think, I'm assuming there's no detent ball ramp here. Yeah, I don't see any. Didn't feel like there was going to be one. But what I will say is that this blade is long enough and just heavy enough that pushing past this is not hard. That's actually a very small amount of effort. And so if you do push it up on here, going like that, that's pretty easy. Let's talk about this blade. This is a hand rubbed blade, and that is, get that to focus. That is absolutely stunningly gorgeous, but it's never been my favorite finish. It's a finish that shows scratches very easily, and so this is definitely going to be a light duty knife for me. I'm not going to put this through anything that would risk scratching this, and that's fine. So far as blade thickness goes, this is, I believe, 3.5 millimeters or 0.1375 inches, and so with a blade stock that's just under 0.14, I want it to be a tall grind if it's going to be that thick, because that's not thick, but that's just on the thicker end. I prefer EDC knives to have like 0.12, ideally 0.1 or below, and especially I love knives that have thin slicey blades like the TRMs or the Bug Out or something that has 0.09. And so 0.14, if it's going to be like that, then I want it to be a full flat grind, and I want it to be just that. I want it to be a full flat grind. I want it to be a tall blade. And this is doing both of those. I quite like to see that, because this is a nice tall grind. And so I'm not going to be doing a ton of hard work with this, and I don't really do a ton of hard work period with my knives, but I'm not going to do a ton of hard cutting with this just because of the fact that this is like a beautiful luxury hand satin finish. But I do suspect that geometry wise that this is probably a pretty good slicer, and it looks like it gets reasonably thin behind the edge. This is not like exceptionally thin behind the edge looking. Let's see if I can get that to focus. But this looks to me, just from looking at that, like this is going to be probably about 0.12 behind the edge. Feels like it's probably about not 0.12, what am I trying to say? 20 thousandths behind the edge, 0.02. It might be even less than that. It might be like 0.18. But I'll measure that maybe and put it up on the screen. I don't expect this, just doesn't look screaming thin behind the edge, but it does look nice and thin enough. Another important thing is, man, this plunge grind is done pretty darn well. So the plunge grind is the grind that takes from the full thickness of the blade stock down to the thinnest behind the edge up here. And if you do a cutaway like this, then it becomes sharpening choil. And what you can see is that the plunge ends right about here. And so you have this full thickness, this whole height right here, from there all the way down to there to sharpen before you start getting a smile. I love to see that. That's very, very nice. So this knife would be pretty easy to sharpen. The edge itself, this is a used knife. It came to me, I think it was described as second owner, can't tell if it's been used. I don't know, something like that. But I assume it's been used. But the edge looks nice. The grind looks even and looks like the original factory grind. yeah, that looks new. Wow, that's pretty nice. What other stuff would have gone here? One of the things I just really like about this is how geometric everything is. You know, it's got just like kind of fun chamfers everywhere. Instead of being rounded, it has panels, but it's still, because those panels do provide curvature as you go, it does feel contoured in that way. Like it has this really nice sloping feel to it that, wow, yeah, okay, I gotta make sure I get used to that. There we go. It feels nice and rounded in my hand. Also, I'm going to say with my particular hands, so this won't be true if you have fundamentally different size hands than me. I have medium-sized glove hands. This pocket clip is hitting in an ideal spot right at this groove. So while these corners are jabby, I don't find them jabbing me. Maybe that would change in use, but I'm finding that where I'm putting my hands and my fingers going, all of these things that could be sharp corners are not actually a place that I'm applying pressure. So your mileage will vary. If you have larger hands than me, you probably won't be able to fit these two fingers here quite as comfortably. You might find that you're pressing up against this. Maybe that would suck. This is one of the less jabby corners. It could be less, it could be better, but like this is a lot nicer to press against than that. And so I think if you do have larger hands and you find yourself right on that, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it would be certainly more comfortable if you could do what I'm doing. What else? This jimping up here in the open form is all the way back here, and this isn't a spot that I normally find that I want jimping. I normally want jimping right about here if I'm going to have it at all, or up here. But I'm not a super big fan of jimping. I think knives work better if they ergonomically can stay comfortably in your hand without jimping, and I do find that this kind of swell here, this almost looks like a gun stock pattern, where it's bigger at the base and then it comes in. I find that this feels pretty good and locked into my hand, because the fact that my fingers are pinched into this little swell or down here means that it doesn't feel like it can move forward or back. That feels nice. What do we got going on the top of this blade? We've got this big swedge that runs down the entire way, and it's cool. It's sloping in line with the blade. I'm trying to get that to focus is hard. My camera never wants to focus on hand satin. Anyway, what I'm saying is that the line of this curves as we go, and it's much more common to find swedges that are just a straight line, because that's a lot easier to do. This kind of swedge that follows the curve of the blade is significantly more complicated, but gives it a really nice look. I love that. And it gives it the look almost of a crown spine. What it's basically doing is giving you a crown spine, but made into 3 panels, the same way that the handle is giving you a curved handle, but instead done as geometrically as three panels. So all around, I find that the aesthetics of this knife just tie together really, really well. And that's always been the big draw for me, is that I just think this knife is stunning looking. I think Philippe Jourget's work in general is pretty stunning looking. So cool. I am super excited to have this. And I would say that while there are definitely sharp corners that shouldn't be there, just plain shouldn't is I think the correct term. At this price point, this is an over $400 knife. That's table price. They shouldn't have sharp corners. But this implementation of it, the one in full tie that's thinner, that's milled out, that has the stronger detent on the full frame lock thing, this is, I think, the best possible version. There's a version of the full tie that has a carbon fiber inlay and it's got cool micro milling on it. That, sure, at that point, it has all of the same benefits and it's just an aesthetic thing if you want the inlay or not. But compared to the liner lock versions, I think this one is without a doubt the way to go, because it fixes almost all of the complaints that my friends have about those versions, and I think it looks stunning and works great. So this is a full half-hour unboxing, as I am increasingly known to do, but I hope you guys enjoyed this. I am very happy to have this in hands and finally be able to have one, and I think it probably will stick around in my collection. I didn't know if it would. I think it probably will. Yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.